There seems to be a lot of things in our world that we ascribe negativity to that are not overtly negative. What I mean by that is that we can make things that, in fact, actually have a lot of positive characteristics to them, but we just make the assumption that they're bad. And once we've made that assumption, we don't want anything to do with those sorts of things. Like, take, for instance, when we were kids, I don't think that there's many of us who really looked forward to getting up and going and spending 7-8 hours in the school being taught. And yet as adults now, most of us would say having an education is a good thing. As we've gotten older, maybe things that used to seem positive, though, now for one reason or another feel negative to us. I'm not much for running these days, since I believe the only good reason to run is if a bear is actively chasing you. But I also know that there are positives to running, allegedly. But it is something that we are all guilty of doing. We take something that might seem like it's difficult, or it might seem like it's uncomfortable for us, and we immediately assume that because it is difficult or uncomfortable for us, that therefore it is a negative thing. And once we've made up our minds that something is too difficult or too negative, then it becomes nearly impossible for us to shake out of that mindset. It becomes impossible for us to get rid of that particular thought. If I had to guess, I'd say that's probably why most of us are not overly fond of the concept of fasting. But the truth is, it's an incredibly powerful tool to help us reach the next level. So I think we need to talk about it. Time for a midweek moment. The very concept of fasting is one that seems to be experiencing a bit of a cultural renaissance right now, particularly in the world of weight loss. The idea is that you intentionally skip meals or you hold off on eating until a certain time of day as a means to lose weight. I have friends who have done this and have seen great results from it. And while, yes, fasting can be helpful in this arena, the thing that we tend to miss with fasting is that it is so much more than missing a meal, at the very least in the spiritual realm of things. The practice of fasting has actually been around since, well, forever. In the practice of our faith, fasting is not only encouraged, there are connotations from Jesus himself that seems to indicate that it is expected when he explains how it is that we should fast in Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 18. There it says, "And when you fast," not if, when, "do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you that they have received their reward. But when you fast," again, when, not if, "anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Again, those first 4 words, "and when you fast," feel awfully telling, don't they? So what is fasting in the context of talking about our faith and getting into the next level? Well, fasting is typically when we abstain from eating for a spiritual purpose. Oftentimes we will use the time that we would normally spend eating and consuming and use that time to practice some of the other spiritual disciplines that we've already talked about. Some people will use that meal time to devote solely to prayer, to just spend that time pleading with God. Some will use that time for their meditation, to be able to give an opportunity for God to speak to them. Some will use that also in studying the scriptures, going deep into a particular passage or book of the Bible. It is something that can help us reconnect with God in a deep and meaningful way. And it's something that Jesus himself did on more than one occasion, but most notably when he fasted for 40 days. But fasting isn't always just about food. In fact, some people will choose to fast other things within their lives. Maybe going without being on their phones for certain hours of the day. Maybe choosing to not watch television abstaining from things that we have a tendency to devote large chunks of our time in, and instead choosing to use that time in pursuit of God. Yes, food is probably the most common and the most understood form of fasting, but it is far from the only form that fasting can take. Sometimes it is useful for us to break a habit that we can call less than godly, if you will. Make no mistake, fasting is not easy because we are talking about breaking sometimes long carried routines in our lives, but we are doing so for a deeper purpose. So how do we get started? Right? I'm not going to recommend that we go straight for the full 40 like Jesus did. But like a lot of new practices in our lives or new things for us, it's better if we start small and build up. If you go to a gym for the first time ever today, it's probably not going to be a great idea for you to try to bench press 300 pounds. Instead, start with one meal. Pick one meal over the course of this next week that you can be intentional about. And that's a really important word, intentional. You know you can commit that time to prayer or to any of the other spiritual disciplines. Like, don't pick a day when you already have a packed calendar and you're thinking you're going to miss lunch anyway. Rather, make sure it's a day when you know you have the time to be able to use what would normally be your lunchtime or breakfast or whatever meal it is that you choose to abstain from. And you know you can dedicate that time to prayer, to meditation, to study, to whichever one of the other spiritual disciplines that you think you need to do. And then this is the hardest part when it comes to this sort of thing. Follow through on that. Follow through on that sort of thing. Commit that time to prayer, meditation, study, whatever else it is. And seek after God and His will for your life. Fasting can be so incredibly helpful in different arenas in our lives. When we're in the midst of a crossroads and we don't know which direction to go, fasting can help us discern the direction that God would have us go in. When we're in the midst of a spiritual crisis, fasting can help draw us closer to the heart of God. The continued practice of fasting can help us remain in close communion with our loving Father. It's not easy to do, but again, that's why we call them discipline. Once again, in the month of November, our book of the month is Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortlund. Again, this is not a very big book. It's pretty short. It's a nice light reading, but I think it's something that's going to help you dive deeper. I will be honest with you. There are a couple of times throughout this entire book where he gets a little repetitive, but I think that's intentional. Because oftentimes we need to have something said to us over and over again before it really begins to sink in. And it is clear from chapter 1, page 1, if you will, that Dane really wants us to grab hold of what the heart of Jesus truly is. And so again, I think that Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortlund is a great book for you to be able to pick up and read. Again, it's not a very long one. You should be able to get it done throughout the entire month of November. Make sure you get a copy of Dane Ortlund's Gentle and Lowly. Again, fasting is something that I think can be incredibly influential and impactful in our walk with Jesus. It's a practice that I don't do routinely. I probably should, but when I have utilized it in my life, it has certainly helped in the ways that I've hoped and prayed for. And I think it's going to be just as beneficial to you. But this has been your midweek moment. Take care of yourselves.